Hello, my treasures. It's time to go over the much awaited balancing changes for Festival of Legends that was supposed to be yesterday but came out today. And because this patch was delayed, we are not going to have a standard video today, though we will have it tomorrow. So let's begin. The first change is going to be to Sinful Brand. It's going to do 1 damage instead of 2 damage, which is actually a pretty good change to help with the overall damage output of spell Demon Hunter. Can you believe this card used to be a 1-mana card and people didn't actually play it? Turns out once we got enough random 1-damaging spells that you can use it in combination with this card, it became an absolute problem. And for my testing from going down swinging a Demon Hunter, this card felt incredibly powerful even in that deck. While it might have not been the main win condition, I can see why a lot of people wanted this card to be nerfed. And given the severity of this nerf and the previous nerf, I do think this card will probably become unplayable, especially given the fact that it doesn't have any type of school magic tag, so you can't easily get additional copies. Now for the next card, which is going to be Fail Scale Evoker, where they're going to change their attack to 3 instead of 5. I don't understand why this is the change. It makes no sense why they're going to be lowering the attack. That attack value doesn't really win you or lose you the game. The reason why this card gets played in Big Demon Hunter is the fact that it allows you to mana cheat out big demons. I'm happy that the deck finally has seen some relevancy in the metagame, but it can be incredibly frustrating to play against because of All Fel Break Loose, where they can just revive whatever big demon that they get off of this card. The card by itself isn't really a big problem, but given the fact that we do have a lot of big demons that are really good to be able to mana cheat out, a change like this probably won't make that deck any less playable, and I do think with all the other changes, that big Demon Hunter is probably going to be the Demon Hunter deck most people run if you are a fan of that class. Now for the next card, which is Predation, which is going to get a buff and a nerf at the same time. It is going to be a 2-mana spell instead of a 3-mana spell that deals 2 damage and costs 0 if you've played a Naga while holding this. I do think this doesn't really affect it too much for the mana cost being lowered, because most of the time you're playing this, it's going to always cost 0. However, this does help with some of the damage output that Lady Cynthia, which before was a guaranteed 10 points of damage on a single turn for 3 mana, which is absolutely insane. However, they are focusing on the wrong card in my opinion. They probably should have increased the cost of Unleash Spell, because that would have hit both meta-relevant Demon Hunter decks, and thus allow for less changes to be done instead of nerfing a bunch of cards. For the general player base, the more cards that get nerfed, the better, because you get full dust value return. However, I do think this and the Evoker change aren't going to do enough to make either of the decks less playable. Now for the next card, which is going to be to Battlefield Necromancer, lowering their HP to 2 instead of 3. Really good change. This allows some of the more controlled decks that have early game removals that does 2 damage to be a lot more playable now. And it also does slow down Unholy Death Knight by a little bit of their swarming capabilities. Now for Blightfang, who is going to be a 4-cost card instead of a 3-cost card. I think originally he was a 4-cost card, but they buffed him up because Unholy DK was the weakest out of the 3 Death Knight archetypes. However, because all of the other Death Knight decks have been nerfed into oblivion, Unholy has risen to the top of Death Knight. To be honest, that actually makes a lot of sense of why it's risen to the top, mainly due to the fact that Frost Death Knight already played very similar to how Unholy Death Knight wanted to, and Unholy had a lot of tools that Frost didn't have access to that allowed you to finish off the game if you got a lot of minions to stick on board. Another thing worth mentioning is the fact that Unholy doesn't really rely on triple rune cards, and thus making the changes to the Death Knight discoverability pool didn't actually affect the deck in any way. Overall, I'm really happy with both of the changes to these Death Knight cards, because it doesn't absolutely kill the card, but should slow down the deck they fit in. Now for the next card, which is to High Cultist Basaleph, who is going to be 5 mana instead of 4. He was actually changed in March of the Lich King, the same set he came out in, because Priest at the time didn't really have any new style of deck to play around with, but they had given a lot of Undead support and a lot of Shadow Priest support within that set, and they wanted to push it a little bit forward. However, with the new rotation, a lot of the decks that have been at the top of the meta are decks that were buffed up in that balancing patch during March of the Lich King. And because those were cards that were buffed up during that time, the meta felt very stale when it came to this set. A lot of the cards within Festival of Legends just feel way weak compared to the previous sets of the past year, because those cards had to be at a higher power level due to quest lines, hero cards, and other cards that rotated all out. I do think this card will probably see a lot less play in Aggro Priest because it no longer fits perfectly on curve whenever your opponent does AoE board clear a wide board of undead minions, which isn't necessarily a change I really like to see, but I do think it is better for the overall health of the game. Now for the next card, which I don't understand why they're only doing this to it. Anub'Rekhan is going to give 5 armor instead of 8. I don't think this change is going to do anything. It's one of those things where I don't know how you balance this card. It's a really cool idea of allowing minions to cost armor instead of mana, but it's a really powerful idea, especially with a lot of the really powerful cards that you can use this in combination with. I don't think it giving you only 5 armor is going to change the playability of it at all, because you should still have a lot of ways to gain a bunch of armor in the same turn or on a previous turn, given the fact that we do have hero power support within Druid as it currently stands that increase the armor that you gain per hero power usage. I know they probably didn't want to absolutely kill the card because it is a fun idea, but honestly, you probably should have just made it where it made the next 1 minion or maybe 2 minions cost armor instead of mana. It is really weird to me that Druid is the one that got this archetype instead of Warrior, but it is what it is, and I can't see, as stated before, where this does anything to the card. Now for the next change, which is going to be to Scribbling Stylographer, which is going to cost 7 instead of 6. Another change that will do nothing because people play this card for 0 mana already. Giving it 1 more mana is not going to make it any less playable. If you wanted to make it way less playable, you maybe increase the mana by 2 or 3. Doesn't actually really matter what the stat lines on this card are. Sure, at 7 mana, a 4/4 isn't necessarily that strong, but 90% of the time when you see this thing slam down, it is never going to cost the max amount of mana, and I don't think Miracle Rogue is going to not want to play this card even if it's only 1 mana increase. Now for cards that are going to be buffed. The first one is Sympathy of Sin, which is going to cost 5 mana instead of 6. I'm actually kind of sad this didn't add a shadow tag on it and the sympathies that come out of it, but at 5 mana, it might be a little bit more playable, as it is currently already the better of the 2 legendaries out of Warlock from Festival of Legends. As weird as that is to say, it gives a lot of tools for a control style Warlock deck, and it is something that I really want to play around with, and may or may not be included in the deck for tomorrow. The next change that is going to be happening is to From the Depths, which is going to be a 3-cost card instead of a 4-cost card. Hey, you can use it in combination with School Teacher again, but the mana reduction is going to be lowered to 2 instead of 3, which actually kind of acts as a nerf too. I do get why they're being a little bit more weary about the mana cheat that is on this card, and honestly this change is probably healthier for the game because there are quite a few neutral cards that can give you additional copies of this. The most evident one is School Teacher, which is the card that was used in combination with this originally, and I don't think that combo is going to be big enough to push Warrior to the absolute top, even though we have more consistent ways to get additional copies now. Either way, these 2 cards are probably the 2 that I'm most looking forward to making use of, and I can't wait to maybe try this playable in tomorrow's video or sometime in the nearby future. Now for the next card, which is to Chorus Rift, increasing the stat buff on the card by 1/1. Overall, I would have preferred to just see the mana cost of this card lowered by 1 instead of increasing the buff that it gives the minion. But this is a decent enough change, I guess. It does allow you to easily combo it with some of the other Rift cards, though the deck still doesn't have a real big payoff. Now for the next card, which is to Demolition Renovator, which is going to have tradable on it. That's I don't know how to feel about this. On one hand, I don't think the tradable will make this card any more playable, but on the other hand, there are a lot of playable locations currently in the metagame, so maybe you might want to run this in the main deck if you can shuffle it back if you're facing a matchup where this card doesn't matter. though the only homes that I can see this card still being in is in a ETC pool, and even then I don't think it's strong enough for that to matter in the long run. Honestly, a really weird change, and I don't understand why they did it. I mean, technically it's more playable, but that's not saying much with this card. And finally, for the standard changes, we're going to have Rotten Applebottom, whose HP is going to be increased to 6, and the Death Rattle is going to restore 6 HP instead of 4, making it a little bit better in control decks. So you might be seeing this a little bit more often in something like Control Warlock, where they're going to be using a lot of the Fatigue support, or even in just a Fatigue Warlock deck. Overall, this card has a lot of homes that it possibly could fit in. I'm actually kind of shocked that they didn't just lower the mana by 1 and just call it a day. This is a really cool change, and I kind of want to play around with it to see if I can find a really playable deck to fit it in. So those were all the changes made today to Standard Hearthstone, and let me know down below which ones you're most looking forward to using after these changes, or what decks that you think are going to be meta warping now that some of the more powerful decks have been. Now, like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. Until next time, bye bye.